So as you can see now, we've shifted our attention into ZBrush. All I've done here is import the OBJ files which we exported previously into ZBrush, all as separate models, and then as you can see over here, I've just combined them all into various subtools underneath the head. That just makes it a lot easier to work with. I can save it out as a tool as well. It just makes things a little bit tidier. And I can just go down here and select these separately just to work on them individually. So now it's just a case of going in and starting to detail the various elements. So let's just have a quick look at the head. I'm just going to go in, we'll smooth the UVs, and I'm just going to add maybe a couple of divisions. And all I'm going to do is, I've got the standard brush there, just reduce that down, or maybe a little bit bigger. And all I'm going to do here is just going to start maybe enhancing some of the larger areas, like around his eyes. You know, just painting in these extra details. And again, all these will just come through in the displacement map when we go back into Maya. We just want to add this to make it look a bit more, you know, add a few more wrinkles in there, some creases. You know, this is just very quick. Maybe just drop it down a little bit and just to make the eyes look a bit more like their sort of folded and wrinkly skin, rather than, I mean, if we look over here at this eye, it just looks a bit flat and basic, so we can just go in and add in some of these. And I'm not getting into tiny details just yet, just trying to focus on these larger areas first. There's no point trying to get ahead of yourself and run before you can walk. You know, at this stage we could do whatever we want. We could even add big bags under his eyes or anything really. And you see, I'm not using any fancy brushes or anything like that. I'm just using the basic standard brush just to start painting in some of these details. So when you're happy with that stage, and if you've gone through and started to, you know, we could even go in and make his head a bit more bobbly and less uniform just by adding in things like that. Do the same over here. You know, just to make it look a bit more deformed and uneven. But then we can just go in and start adding more divisions, and as we get into smaller and smaller details, we can start to think about adding in the actual wound on his head. But before we do that, we just need to add some divisions to the actual stitches. And as you can see, these are just basic squares which we just brought in from Maya. I'm just going to close that down, geometry, and just divide those a few times just so we've got like sort of a rough guide of where the stitches will be. Let's go back to our head, reduce that down. And then let's just see where we could take this cut. Now we know we need it in between these stitches, and it's still quite a low resolution mesh, so as you can see the cut is quite sort of polygony and rough. but we're just getting a basic idea at this stage of where it's going to go. We could add that joining onto there, we could leave it open. Doesn't really matter. So now after we've done that, we can still see all these polygons, so we do need another subdivision in there. And now we can start going in, use a smaller brush, just maybe enhancing these cuts where it's been stitched together. We can see here we've started to come away from the stitches, but we can also start to think about how the stitches are affecting the skin around these wounds. So we need some sort of holes where it's coming out of, because these wounds aren't exactly closed properly, they're still quite open. But again, we're still just working on a low resolution mesh. Now, I'm not going to go into too much depth and just spend ages going through and sculpting the whole head in this video. This is just to give you a rough idea of sort of the process I took when I did sculpt the head. And again, once we've gone through all of this, and even around the lips, add another division. And now I'm starting to think, well, the cut's a little bit wide. Let's just drop this down a little bit more. Just enhance some of these. You know, add in some stretch marks, because the skin around here is being pulled, and you know, enhance the edges of the cuts as well. And if you're not sure about how this is supposed to look, I mean, I'm going for a more sort of stylized look here, but if you're wanting a more realistic look, then feel free to have a look online for some reference. For, I mean, there's plenty of wounds and things on there that you can find. But now we're working on with a finer divisions on the mesh, we can get a bit more detail in. You know, just get all this looking like it's all being pulled in, because they're trying desperately to get those stitches to seal up that wound. And then we'll just increase that, and then we'll just go in with our smooth brush and just soften some of that off. You know, you get the general idea. You know, you want to take your time and, you know, have some fun with it, experiment a little bit too. You know, just follow that procedure all around with each stitch. You know, while you're working on this, you know, higher division, you can also go in and just start to add in some more details around the eyes as well, enhance some of those wrinkles and creases around there. Let's go down to the lips now. And again, just the same sort of process. We want them to look like they're being forced shut. Kind of like that. And just soften those off. And then it's just a case of, once you've gone through, add another division. That'll soften it off a little bit more, and then you can go in and just add in some more finer detail, even use some of the alphas just to add in some cracks and things into the skin. Let's have a look. Where's that alpha? So something like this. Let's make that bigger. Just undo that. So that was probably a bit too intense, so let's have a look. Reduce our intensity down, maybe to 10. We'll invert that. So you could do something like that. Just to add in a bit more skin detail, we could drop this down a bit more. If you're not sure about adding these bits on, remember you can also use your layers. So you can create a new layer and just add these on a layer at a time. And just dragging it like this, it's just adding a bit more detail to the surface. Could even go over here and add some cracks over near the mouth and near the wounds. But that's pretty much how I approached doing the head. Nothing fancy, just basic sculpting using some alphas. And the same could be said for the clothing as well. So let's go down to, let's do the main body, because the scarf was approached in exactly the same way, and it's just the same. We're going to add a couple of divisions. Let's just undo that. Actually, let's redo it. And as you can see, the mesh has shrunk a little bit there. But we can also go in and we can just move that like so. Just centre that back there. And just move that up a little bit, just so it's back underneath the scarf. Go back to drawing, and then we know we don't want the snake wrapping tightly around his body, so that's going to give us a nice starting point for where we're going to start sculpting in our creases and folds. We'll turn that alpha off. Turn our Z intensity back up. Something like that. There we go, that's better. And you notice it's sort of missing when we sculpt underneath the scarf, so because it's just a subtool we can always just go in and hide that. At the moment we're just focusing on getting this to look like the snake's grabbing him and his clothing's sort of up, folded around. Why the snake's holding him, I've no idea. And just, oop. Again, we're just blocking in, just like we did with the head, just blocking in larger shapes first. And again, if you want more precise and realistic looking sort of folds and creases, feel free to hunt out some proper reference. And again, just like we mentioned previously with the UVs, the back of him is not going to be seen, so I wouldn't spend too much time putting in lots of intricate details around here. As long as we can see from the front, you know, we've got that detail in there. You know, just add some recesses underneath these where the folds are hanging over. Then go in, add another division. Shrink down the brush. Then we can start to add in some finer details. Sort of like so. Enhancing these folds and creases. But there you get the general idea. Like I keep saying, nothing fancy, no fancy tools, it's just a case of going over with the standard brush, maybe use the pinch brush as well to enhance some of these creases. But I'm going to leave you now to finish off working on the head and the body, and the snake and the scarf. In fact, I'd leave the snake for now because we're just going to use a noise, using the noise tool to add details to that. So let's bring back that scarf. So for now, just continue working on the head, adding in all these details to the scarf and everything. In the next video, I'll quickly demonstrate the noise tool, and then we'll start to look at adding textures.